Now available in paperback and Kindle. Vampires stalk the darkness of the Eternal Night. Get your copy of Eternal Night in paperback and Kindle on Amazon.com. Does anybody remember when a story had a definitive end? I mean, I remember the days when I used to watch movies like Pretty Woman or Ghost, and it was basically the story ended with that one movie, and once that movie was over, it had a definitive end, and I don't really see that going on here in the 21st century, and I believe that's one of the reasons why stories are so bad as related to the entertainment industry. Now, I remember the days when a movie basically was a one and done thing. You went to the theater and watched the movie, and it was over once it finished. And I also remember the days when you would go and watch a TV show, and it was usually over in 5 seasons because they completed all the things that they wanted to do as related to story. And after they finished the story, they were ready to move on to something else. And I also remember the day when a writer like myself would go out here and write one novel and just basically be done with it. However, things really started to change around the late 1970s as related to entertainment, because that's when entertainment started to become a bit more commercialized. And as it became a bit more commercialized with the success of films like Star Wars and Superman the movie, not to mention many of the horror movies, this is where we started to see the start of the commodification of entertainment as related to creating franchises. Now, these franchises were a safe way for studio executives, publishers, and TV producers to be able to ensure they would receive a profit from the initial concept and then be able to create derivatives of those products, such as sequels, spin-offs, or a series, and be able to continue creating a revenue stream for themselves that basically had less risk than going out here and exploring a fresh and original concept. Because the franchise basically meant that you could go out here and create a original concept, and the original concept was so successful that you could go out here and do derivatives of that, such as a sequel of a franchise or a series, and basically you would be able to guarantee that you would have a base of viewers or a base of readers or a base of customers who would go out here and support that media. Moreover, you would have further support from these individuals if they went out here to buy licensed items such as merchandise, such as action figures, or spin-off materials such as books or comic books or adaptations. They would be able to again build a wealth base with this material. Unfortunately, over the last 40 years of entertainment, the entire franchise business model has really stifled creativity in the entertainment industry, and we're starting to see rot as related to the entertainment industry because many of these old stories just won't end. And the reason why these stories are just rotting these days is because they just have gone way past their shelf life, way past their storyline, and that was shown with films like Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny, the Star Wars sequel trilogy, and other concepts that have been rehashed to death, such as the Star Trek movie franchise. It's clear to me that there are no more stories to tell audiences with these franchises, but they continue to go on because many studio executives are afraid of risk and they're afraid of failing as related to business. So what they do is continue to keep these stories going, even though there is no more audience that's interested in them. And what's happening here as related to the entertainment industry is that many of these businesses just fail to answer the critical question that gets audiences engaged, and that is, why should we care? I mean, there comes a point where the audience stops caring about old franchises, stops caring because the story is basically finished. And that was really shown to me with the entire Terminator franchise, with Terminator 2 Judgment Day, Clearly, after Terminator 2 Judgment Day, James Cameron had told the story of the Terminator, and the story was basically finished. But Hollywood wanted to continue maintaining the franchise and sadly pumped out multiple sequels that never really caught on. And when those sequels didn't catch on, like Terminator 3 Rise of the Machines, they tried to reboot the franchise. Unfortunately, all of those attempts to reboot the franchise really can't crack the code as related to the formula for the Terminator, because James Cameron has basically told the story, and with the story basically over, they want to continue the story, continue to make money, but there's no more story to tell. And that basically has been the paradigm of the entertainment industry over the last, I'd say, 40 to 50 years. They continue to try to tell stories where there is no more story. And as they try to continue telling stories, what they do is basically try to, again, they'll have a great first movie, they'll have a middling second movie, and then by the third, the entire franchise falls apart because there's no more story to tell. And there's no more story to tell because eventually what happens with many writers like myself is that there's no more road for us to run on. Basically, all the stories have been told with this character, and instead of ending things on the exclamation point that would have made these characters' stories memorable and iconic, what many of these studios do and these publishers and these TV producers do is they continue to try to continue milking these series, and what they have is no story to be a part of it. So what happens is they're hoping to continue to keep the audience captive, but there's no reason for the audience to care. And as they pump out these sequels and spin-offs and other derivatives, what happens is that this eventually dilutes the value of the original to the point where the audience just becomes completely indifferent to it. Now, I believe that these companies would be better off if they just did one story. If they just did one story and left it alone, they would be fine, because long term that would add value to that story, because it would continue to resonate with people, and it would continue to resonate with people because they could see the initial message, and as they saw the initial message of that story, they would continue to care about that story, and that would add long-term value to that story, because we would see that, oh, this story is special and unique. However, when you go out here and do multiple sequels, in a lot of cases, what you do is dilute the value of that story. Moreover, when people become too familiar with these characters and see them way too much, it gives them less reason to care about those characters. It gives them less reason to care about these characters because we constantly see these characters, and even worse, we don't see how these characters progress. In some cases, we see how they either stagnate or they regress, like in the case of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, where the heroes like Iron Man, Captain America, and Thor basically wound up regressing over time until Avengers Endgame came along and eventually compromised those characters' ethics as they looked to go back in time to stop Thanos' snap by creating their own Infinity Gauntlet. And in that case, the heroes stopped being heroes because they basically ran the story too long and ran out of road. And as they ran out of road, they basically continued to try to keep this story going longer than it did. And this happens also to many sitcoms that could have been considered great, like many of the iconic sitcoms such as I Love Lucy and many other sitcoms. They basically take it to one season or two seasons too far, and instead of going on to become a classic, what they do is basically stretch things because the studio continues to make money on this show. And as they look to continue to keep making money, they continue to keep making the same characters over and over again, not understanding that eventually this basically diminishes the value of your story and also diminishes the audience's willingness to care, because eventually people, yes, they may like a character or a story over a period of time, but people do need a break from seeing these people Just like people need a break from seeing people in their life, most people, we do want a break because seeing the same person all the time gets really boring. And again, this is what happens with these kind of stories, is that these characters stay around too long, and then they start to become stale. And that's what happens when you don't know when to end a story, because a writer has to know when to end a story. They have to know when to end things as related to putting a period at the end of a character story and put an end to that story, because endings are a good thing. Endings add that, have that finality that make you say, okay, this character's story is over, this character's story is finished, and now I can move on. I can move on to something else. And as you move on to something else, you can get that breather for yourself as related to the audience. And for a creator, it gives you a breather so that you can come up with some fresh concepts and some fresh ideas. That's what ending a story does. Ending a story allows you to move on and move yourself forward. And it also allows a creator like myself to be able to start growing in our craft, allows us to start growing in our craft, because the whole thing is when you work with the same characters for too long, it can be like being in an echo chamber where all you're hearing are the same characters talking to you. And sometimes you need to go out here and talk to some other people and get some perspective. You need to go out here and work with some other characters so that you can learn different approaches and different techniques for writing. And that can help you further hone your craft as a writer by working with new characters, because new characters basically force you to come out of your old habits and start to work on new ones. That's something that I had to learn how to do as I was out here starting with my professional writing career. I started out, again, with the John Haynes character in the 90s, but as I saw that the character was getting stale, I created the Isis character. And then later on, when the John Haynes character didn't work, I came back to him in 2005 for The Temptation of John Haynes. But the books that really helped me grow was when I wrote the book A Recipe for Success, because that was a brand new set of characters, a brand new set of characters that I had to work with. And that's where I started to see that growth. And that's when I came back in 2005 after writing that book in 2004. And working with that group of characters helped me grow. And as I grew, I then was able to write The Temptation of John Haynes, which was what I believe to be the best John Haynes story. And then I decided to start to explore screenwriting with the Marilyn Marie character and All About Marilyn. And as I worked with different characters, it helped me to, again, learn different techniques of writing and learn different styles of writing, like screenwriting. I mean, working with different characters really, again, helps you develop your skills and helps you to grow in your craft. And that's why sometimes I like to take breaks away from certain groups of characters. Like when I was working on the Isis series, I mean, I remember working on the Thetas around 2012, 2013, and just working on one character and telling a story from one character's perspective. And I also remember around 2015 working with the Spinsterella character, or Matilda Crowley, and working with that character again helped me to get another development in my craft. And help me to develop my craft, because again, when you work with different characters, you have to do things like come out of your comfort zone. You have to go out here and start building a new world. And as you are coming out of your comfort zone and building new worlds, you are getting to know different people and learning about different people. And that really helps a writer really grow in their craft. But the only way for you to begin those new stories is to end the old stories. And sadly, what I see in the entertainment industry is people so caught up in making money, they can't see how them continuing to keep these stories going is basically cutting their profit margin, because they won't end these old stories. And as they continue to keep these old stories going, they can't get anything to begin because they're afraid of risk. And they're afraid of risk because they want to continue getting these, what they believe to be guaranteed cash grabs from these sequels. But the problem with this is that sequels eventually get stale. And even if you develop a model for building a world like the Marvel Cinematic Universe, eventually the audience becomes tired of being a part of that world. And that's why you need to end a story. You need to end a story because stories have to have an ending. And if the story doesn't have an ending, you can't begin a new one. And if you can't begin a new one, the audience has no reason to care, because the audience eventually, what happens with old content is that they start to become indifferent and apathetic to it. And they become indifferent and apathetic to that content because it's the same old characters over and over again. And in many cases, many writers don't take a look at their work and see how their work basically starts to repeat itself. They don't really see how their work basically is starting to repeat itself, where we're not seeing this character transform over time. Now, when it comes to serialized storytelling, like I do on the Isis, Esteem, and John Haynes series, yes, you may have certain beats or certain elements in a story, but you're still seeing that character grow. But when you have writers who don't really understand how things work, what they do is continue to make the same story and don't see how they're repeating themselves. I mean, they don't see how they're repeating the same story over and over again, or how they've basically run out of story. I mean, you can eventually, in some cases, just run out of story because there's nothing else to tell. There's nothing else to do. And sometimes it's best in certain cases to leave the story ending at a certain point, because what you want to do to get people excited about a story is leave something to their imagination. Leave something to their imagination so that they can come up with their own ideas regarding these characters. Because if they're coming up with ideas about these characters, they're basically engaged with these characters. So that's another reason why it's okay to end a story. Okay to end a story and leave on an up note and leave things where everything basically ends on a good note, like the way Star Wars ended after Return of the Jedi. I believe that was the perfect ending for that trilogy. It was the perfect end for things because we saw the end of the story, and it should have ended there. And this is something that I like about certain movies that are done in one. It's basically over. It's basically finished. And with it finished, we can leave things to our imagination, to what happened later. But the whole thing is the story that we wanted to see is basically over. That's why I love movies like Marty and Sunset Boulevard and many other great classic movies, is because there's no sequel. I mean, we don't see Marty getting married and having a family. We don't need a Marty sequel. The story was about him finding love. In the case of Sunset Boulevard, it was all about Norma Desmond basically looking to get back in front of the cameras, and the tragedy of Joe Gillis losing his life being the thing that led to her getting fame as related to him who wanted to have success. And again, it was the great tragedy of that story that it ended with Norma Desmond getting her close-up. I mean, that was the perfect ending, and it was over and finished. And we need, as I see it in entertainment, more stories that are done in one, stories that are done and finished, stories that basically are over and done. We need stories to end these days. I mean, that's what I see with entertainment and media. We do need to see an end. We do need to see things ending on a period, sending on an exclamation point. I mean, things reach an end. And again, sometimes a writer needs to take that time and just let a story end, let a character's story be over, and let that story be over so that you can go on to explore different concepts. Because again, I'll repeat it for people, when you work on the same characters for too long, what happens is you become comfortable with those characters, and that comfort really prevents you from growing in your craft and taking those creative risks, prevents you from being able to go out here and take on new challenges and take on new challenges that will help you improve in your craft. That's what ending stories is important. And I look at things, and again, I look at a lot of concepts that basically, again, have run their course. I mean, a lot of stuff that I see in the entertainment industry, again, has run its course. But nobody has the courage to say that it's over because they're afraid of the unknown. They're afraid of taking risks. They're afraid of taking on challenges. But I look at it as something that's really great to begin a story. Now, the toughest part of writing is beginning a story, but the whole joy is getting to the end. And like the late Sid Field said in his book Screenplay, stories are about endings and beginnings. And you can either end on top, like the Star Wars trilogy, or you can end in an ignominious fashion, like the Superman franchise with Superman 4: The Quest for Peace, or the Batman franchise with Batman and Robin. That's the choice you have, but I would rather end on top and put an exclamation point at the end of things and move on, rather than have everything end on a period and end on a whimper, because a period basically means that things are just ending on a low note, and you want to end on a high note. You want to end your story on a high note that leaves great memories in people's minds, great memories in people's minds that has them excited for the next story, because once you end a story, you can basically go focus on something else. And when you focus on something else, you may be able to make something greater than the story you made before. Now, if you want to pick up some of my fiction on the SJS Direct imprint that I mentioned in this video, such as the books of the ISIS series, the Steam series, the John Haynes series, my novel A Recipe for Success, my novel The Thetas, my novel Eternal Night, and my books of the Spinsterella trilogy. Yeah, I know I wrote books that are in series, but they all have beginnings, middles, and ends, and I always end my story so that you can begin another, because I don't really want to continue working with the same characters all the time. Sometimes I always switch it up and mix it up, because that helps me to develop my skills and, again, enables me to stay sharp. You can find all of those books on Amazon.com in paperback and Kindle format. You can also find them at other online booksellers like Draft2Digital, Google Play, Barnes & Noble, and big box retailers like Walmart and Target. And if you'd like to see me make more videos about writing, you can send a donation to the PayPal or the Cash App by clicking the links in the description box. That's all I have to say for this video. You can comment, rate, and subscribe. Now available in paperback and e-readers, Spinsterella. Discover the dark side of love in this goth and lovely romance with Spinsterella. Get Spinsterella in paperback and e-readers at your favorite online bookseller today. Now available in paperback and e-readers, The Temptation of John Haynes. Give in to temptation and pick up this action-packed African-American paranormal romance. Get The Temptation of John Haynes in paperback and e-readers today. Support Black-owned and Black-operated digital broadcast media. www.niceradionetwork.com. Nice Radio Network, broadcasting 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.